I've always believed that you can't truly understand a machine unless you strip it down to the bolts and the grease. You can look at the glossy blueprints all day long, but the real truth, that's in the oil pan. And let me tell you, I know machinery. I'm James. You probably don't know my face, and that's exactly how I like it. My company, well, my investment group, let's call it, is big, really big. We don't mess around with small change. When we decide to acquire a company, we're talking billions, maybe more. For months, my analysts had been drooling over this startup called SynergyFlow. They had the numbers, the traction, the buzzwords, the whole package. They were supposed to be the next big thing in automated logistics, disrupting the industry, blah, blah, blah. My board was ready to sign the papers, a valuation of $3 billion, just waiting for my final approval. But something felt off. I've been burned before by glossy presentations and charismatic CEOs. I learned a long time ago that the bigger the facade, the bigger the mess hiding behind it. You see, when a company knows it's about to be acquired, everyone straightens up. They put on a show. The books look perfect, the culture seems vibrant, and the coffee machine is always stocked. It's theater. I needed the truth. And the truth doesn't hang out in the corner office. The truth is found where nobody looks. So I did something completely insane. I put on the oldest, baggiest jeans I own, a beat-up pair of work boots, and I drove my ancient pickup truck, the one I keep for trips to the hardware store, down to the SynergyFlow headquarters in Austin. I called up the cleaning service they used, told them I was a temporary hire named Jim, filling in for a guy who broke his leg, and asked for the night shift. It was ridiculously easy. Nobody verifies the cleaning crew. They are the invisible people. You got to understand, I own private jets. I could buy and sell this entire building just to prove a point. But here I was, James, the supposed financial titan, learning how to properly disinfect a communal sink. It was humbling, hilarious, and absolutely necessary. My first night at SynergyFlow was an education in itself. The office was exactly what you picture when you hear hot startup. Open floor plan, neon signs, expensive ergonomic chairs nobody knew how to adjust, and the noise. Even after 8 p.m., the place was buzzing. Not with productive work, mind you, with performative work. People pacing while on calls, talking loud about scaling and vertical integration. I checked in with the daytime supervisor, a tired woman named Maria, who just handed me a cart full of supplies and told me, just focus on the third floor. They're the worst. The third floor was where the magic supposedly happened. It was where the founders lived. Let me introduce you to Chad. Chad was the CEO. He was 32, wore tailored suits with sneakers, and had the kind of aggressive, blindingly white smile that made you instinctively check your wallet. He was still there, sitting in a glass-walled office, barking into his phone about a yacht party they were planning for their Q3 success. Then there was Tiffany. She was the chief operating officer. Sharp, dressed like she stepped off a magazine cover, and had eyes that looked right through you, or rather they looked past you, specifically if you were wearing a uniform and holding a mop. She was constantly documenting things for Instagram stories, showing off the hustle culture. I got to work. I started with the break room. The waste was staggering. SynergyFlow had one of those fancy catered meal plans. Every day they had gourmet food delivered. And every night, I was throwing out trays piled high with untouched lobster bisque, artisanal bread and expensive salads. Hundreds of dollars of food straight into the dumpster, simply because the catered delivery arrived late and they ordered pizza instead. I noted it down. My little janitor notebook, the one I kept in my back pocket, was filling up fast. Item 1, excessive food waste. Estimated annual cost, $150,000 for a company that claimed to be cash efficient. As I moved into the main work area, I started listening. Cleaning trash cans is a goldmine for information. People throw away documents they think are unimportant, or they leave sticky notes everywhere. I found a printout in a recycling bin that caught my eye. It was an invoice for a software subscription, a proprietary data modeling tool. Cost $8,000 a month. Written across the top in what looked like Chad's sloppy handwriting were the words, "Cancel ASAP." Never figured out how to use this thing. They were paying $96,000 a year for a tool they couldn't operate, just because it looked good on an asset sheet 2 years ago. It wasn't just the money, though. It was the attitude. A few days later, I was cleaning the entryway when Chad came storming out of his office, yelling at a young engineer named Pete. "Pete, Where is that Q4 projection model? I need it looking sharp for the investors meeting next week, Chad shouted, not caring that half the office was listening. Pete, looking terrified, stammered, I sent you the raw data this morning, Chad. I was just consolidating the growth projections. But based on the current user churn, I don't care about churn, Pete. Don't show me the truth, show me the story. We need 20% growth. Make it 20%. If you can't make the numbers hit the target, you're manipulating the data incorrectly. Get it done before 8 a.m. tomorrow, or start packing your mechanical keyboard. I paused, pretending to buff a scuff mark on the marble floor. Manipulating the data incorrectly. That wasn't a slip of the tongue, that was a directive. Chad wasn't interested in reality. He was interested in a convincing narrative for the acquisition. This was serious. This wasn't just corporate waste. This was outright fraud being built into the core metrics we were basing our $3 billion offer on. I started staying later, sometimes until 3 a.m., just observing. I realized that the hustle culture Tiffany constantly broadcasted was a mask for chaos and poor management. Nobody knew what they were doing. They were busy being busy. One night, I was cleaning the server room, a job nobody else wanted because it was noisy and cold. I noticed a stack of returned equipment boxes, high-end servers still shrink-wrapped. They had purchased enough hardware to handle triple their current user base, based on projections from a year ago that never materialized. The equipment was now outdated and just sitting there depreciating. I pulled up the acquisition file on my secret, highly encrypted work phone, disguised as an old flip phone I used for podcasts. The balance sheet SynergyFlow provided listed this equipment as active, cutting-edge assets. They hadn't factored in the depreciation or the fact that it was useless junk sitting in a cold room. The deeper I dug, the angrier I got. Not angry because I was cleaning up after these kids, but angry because they were wasting talent, wasting opportunity, and trying to fleece serious investors based on lies. The founders, meanwhile, treated me like I was literally part of the furniture. Tiffany used to leave her empty oat milk latte cups right next to the trash can, sometimes even on the floor, as if daring me to move them. She never made eye contact. One morning, she walked into the kitchen, saw me wiping down the stainless steel, and sighed dramatically. Jim, could you try to be less visible?" she muttered, grabbing a sparkling water. "It ruins the aesthetic when clients come in and see the cleaning staff milling about." I just nodded. "Sure thing, ma'am." I wanted to tell her that I owned the building her lease was in, but I kept my mouth shut. The game wasn't over yet. The pinnacle of their arrogance came about 2 weeks into my undercover assignment. I was emptying the shredder bins, another excellent source of information. Most people shred sensitive documents, these guys. They shredded things like expense reports that got rejected because the receipt was clearly for a personal shopping spree, not client entertainment. As I was dealing with a jammed shredder, Chad and Tiffany walked past arguing about a staff member. "We need to fire Mark," Chad said, irritation clear in his voice. "He keeps bringing up the customer service ticket backlog. It's bad for morale." Tiffany scoffed. "Mark is a complainer, but we can't fire him right before the acquisition announcement, Chad. It looks bad for retention metrics." "Fine," Chad grumbled. "Just give him a terrible review and put him on a performance improvement plan. He'll quit. That way we save the severance package and the numbers still look good." I froze. They were actively managing their employee turnover to manipulate the data for my acquisition team. They weren't trying to build a business. They were building a deceptive report card. That night I went home, not to my tiny temporary apartment near the office complex, but to my main residence, a place so quiet and large it usually felt like a museum. I sat in my study, looking out over the city lights, and reviewed my notes. I had documented 1. Systemic data manipulation to inflate growth figures. 2. Active suppression of critical customer complaints. 3. Wasteful spending and deliberate misclassification of assets. 4. Unethical labor practices designed to save money on severance. The $3 billion valuation. It was garbage. This company was a beautifully wrapped, empty box, and the founders were morally bankrupt. I had 2 choices. I could call my board, tell them to cancel the deal quietly and walk away, or I could confront the rot. If I just walked away, Chad and Tiffany would find the next sucker. They'd keep running this scam, destroying more careers and wasting more capital. No, they had dismissed me, the invisible janitor, for too long. They needed a lesson in integrity, delivered by the person they least expected. The next morning, I made a small internal report. I didn't send it to my board yet. I decided I would give SynergyFlow one last chance to save itself, or at least give the founders a chance to fix the serious ethical problems I had witnessed. I typed up a concise, professional, and completely anonymous summary of the most egregious violations: the data manipulation, the asset misclassification, and the deliberate creation of a toxic work environment. I signed it simply as a concerned employee. I printed it on the cheap recycled paper I used for my cleaning checklists. That night, I slipped the report under the door of Chad's office, Tiffany's office, and the head of HR's office. I figured they'd read it, realize they were caught, and maybe, just maybe, start cleaning up their act before the final acquisition meeting scheduled for the end of the week. I was naive. I underestimated the depth of their self-absorption. The next day, when I came in for my shift, the office felt different, tense. I was scrubbing the espresso machine, a pointless task, as they'd just spilled coffee all over it again, when the HR manager, a nervous woman named Brenda, approached me. She was flanked by Chad and Tiffany. Chad was furious. His face was blotchy red, and his tailored suit looked like it was about to rip from sheer indignation. Tiffany had her arms crossed, looking down her nose at me with maximum disdain. "Jim," Brenda said, her voice shaking slightly, "we need to talk to you about some, internal matters." I put down my rag and looked up. "Sure, Brenda. Anything wrong with the schedule?" Chad stepped forward, practically vibrating with rage. He held up my anonymous report, crumpled and marked with red pen. "This is you, isn't it?" he hissed. "This pathetic piece of garbage about ethical violations and toxic culture. You wrote this, didn't you, Jim?" I looked at the report. It was the truth, concisely stated. "I did write that, yes," I said calmly. Tiffany scoffed, rolling her eyes toward the ceiling. "Oh, bless his heart. The cleaning guy thinks he's an investigative journalist." "What gave you the right, Jim?" Chad demanded, leaning in close. "You clean toilets. You don't have access to the strategic vision of this company. You're making malicious, unfounded accusations." "I have access to the trash cans, Chad," I replied, my voice still level, "and the recycling bins. I saw the rejected expense reports and overheard the conversation about Mark. I saw the unused $8,000 software subscription. It's not malice. It's basic arithmetic and observation." Chad threw the crumpled paper onto the floor. "You know what? I don't need this kind of negativity. We're about to close the biggest deal of our lives, and I don't need some disgruntled custodial worker sowing discord." He pointed a finger at my chest. "You are fired, Jim. Effective immediately. Get your belongings and get out of my building. Brenda, make sure he gets paid for the hours he worked, and that his keycard is deactivated before he leaves the premises." Tiffany added a final cruel flourish. "And Jim, maybe stick to jobs where people actually appreciate your services, like washing cars. We pay people here for innovation, not for snooping." I stood there, looking at these two arrogant, short-sighted founders who had just confirmed everything I suspected about their character. They weren't just incompetent, they were actively malicious and unethical, and their first response to being confronted with the truth was to silence the messenger. I nodded slowly. "Understood. I'll collect my things." I walked back to the janitor's closet, grabbed my personal bag, and handed my key card to Brenda. She looked genuinely apologetic, but helpless. As I walked out the front door of SynergyFlow, the warm Austin sun hitting my face, I pulled out my real phone, the one that controlled my empire. I called my chief legal counsel, David. "David, it's James." "James, I was just about to call you. The SynergyFlow acquisition meeting is set for 10 a.m. tomorrow. Are you ready to finalize the terms? The founders are excited." I smiled, a slow, cold smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Oh, I'm ready, David, but the terms are changing. I need you to make 3 calls right now. First, ensure my security team is briefed. I want maximum presence in that boardroom tomorrow. Second, notify the SynergyFlow board that I will personally be attending the meeting, not just my delegation. And third, tell our acquisition team to hold off on preparing the final purchase agreement. Tell them we are changing the objective of tomorrow's meeting from acquisition closing to comprehensive due diligence review and internal investigation." David paused, sensing the shift in my tone. "James, what happened?" "I just finished my final due diligence, David," I said, looking back at the gleaming, fraudulent headquarters of SynergyFlow. And let me tell you, the place needs a deep cleaning. A very deep cleaning. I'll see you tomorrow morning at 9:45 a.m. Make sure Chad and Tiffany are seated front and center when I walk in. They won't recognize me, but they will certainly remember the name. I drove my old truck away from the building, leaving behind the mop and the uniform. The game was officially transitioning from undercover investigation to brutal corporate exposure. Chad and Tiffany thought they had silenced the janitor. They had no idea they had just fired the judge, jury, and executioner of their $3 billion dream. Tomorrow was going to be an interesting day. That night, I didn't sleep much. Not because I was nervous, but because I was energized. It felt like I had spent 2 weeks meticulously charting the flaws in a $3 billion time bomb, and now, finally, I was going to push the button. I drove back to my real house, the one with the gate and the security team that definitely knew who I was. I stripped off the gym uniform, the stained boots, the faded SynergyFlow t-shirt I'd been given, the baggy jeans. It felt like shedding a skin. I stood in front of my closet, and instead of choosing comfort, I chose power. I selected a custom-tailored dark charcoal suit, a crisp white shirt, and a silk tie that cost more than Chad's entire month of rent, probably. When I looked in the mirror, the difference wasn't just the clothes, it was the posture. Jim the Janitor was hunched, blending in. James the CEO stood straight, ready to own the room. I spent the rest of the night with David, my chief legal counsel, and a small, trusted team. We went over every single item in my little janitor notebook. The food waste, the unused $96,000 software subscription, the depreciated servers listed as active assets, the recorded conversations about firing Mark to manipulate retention metrics. David, a seasoned veteran of corporate warfare, just kept shaking his head. James, this is unbelievable. They handed you the evidence on a silver platter. No, David, I corrected him. They threw the evidence in the trash and expected me to pick it up without looking. I made sure my team understood the objective for tomorrow wasn't negotiation. It was exposure. We weren't there to save the deal. We were there to save the investors, the employees, and the market from a fraud. We compiled the data into a presentation, not a slick, colorful one, but a stark black and white report titled Immediate Findings of Internal Mismanagement and Ethical Malpractice. When the sun came up over Austin, I was ready. I arrived at SynergyFlow headquarters at 9:45 a.m. sharp. I wasn't driving the old pickup. I was in the back of a black armored sedan, flanked by 2 members of my personal security detail, men who looked like they moonlighted as granite statues. Walking into the lobby was surreal. Just 12 hours earlier, I had been polishing the brass railings and mopping the very floor I now strode across. The daytime receptionist, who usually ignored me entirely, scrambled to greet me, her eyes wide with recognition, not of my face, but of the entourage and the obvious financial gravity I carried. We took the elevator up to the 3rd floor. My security detail stood guard outside the main conference room, creating a very noticeable wall of muscle. The SynergyFlow board members were already seated, looking nervous but excited. This was their big payday. Across the table sat Chad and Tiffany. They were beaming. Chad was tapping his pen, wearing a smirk that screamed confidence. Tiffany was adjusting her posture, ready to shine for the big moment. My acquisition team, led by David, was already there, looking uncomfortable. They knew I was about to drop a bomb, but they didn't know the exact nature of the explosive. I walked in first. The room went silent. I didn't rush. I took my time, allowing the visual information to sink into every person present. I looked directly at Chad. He was still smiling, but his eyes narrowed slightly, trying to place me. Is that the lead investor? He looks familiar. I walked the length of the massive, polished mahogany table, the same table I had wiped clean of pizza grease and spilled coffee residue the night before. I pulled out the chair directly opposite Chad and Tiffany, right at the head of the table. As I sat down, I heard a sharp intake of breath from Tiffany, then a low, guttural noise from Chad. Their smiles had completely vanished. Their faces had drained of all color, leaving them looking sickly and stunned. I recognized that look. It was the moment of dawning horror. They realized they hadn't just fired a janitor. They had fired me, Chad stammered, his voice cracking. Wait a minute. This is some kind of joke. You look exactly like... Tiffany clutched the edge of the table, her eyes wide and darting around the room, desperately seeking an explanation. It can't be. Jim, the cleaning guy, what are you wearing? I leaned forward, placing my hands flat on the table. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the hum of the air conditioning The SynergyFlow board members were staring from Chad and Tiffany to me, completely bewildered. "Good morning, everyone," I said, my voice calm, deep, and carrying the weight of billions. "My name is James. I am the CEO of Meridian Capital and the sole decision maker regarding the proposed acquisition of SynergyFlow." I paused, letting the name sink in. James, not Jim. I looked straight at Chad, whose face was now a fascinating shade of purple. "Chad," I continued, my tone shifting to cool professionalism, "I believe we met yesterday. You were kind enough to terminate my temporary employment." Chad managed to gasp out, "This is impossible. You're the janitor. You were cleaning the toilets." "Yes, Chad," I confirmed easily. "I was cleaning the toilets. I found it quite illuminating, actually. You learn a lot about a company when you see what they flush away." Tiffany finally found her voice, but it was thin and hysterical. "This is insane. You impersonated an employee. This is entrapment. You can't do this." I ignored her outburst and turned my attention to the rest of the board. They were a mix of angel investors, venture capitalists, and long-time advisors. Serious people who now looked like they needed immediate medical attention. "Gentlemen, ladies," I said, addressing the board, "I apologize for the unusual introduction. Due diligence for an investment of this magnitude requires absolute certainty. I have been testing the operational integrity and ethical foundation of SynergyFlow for the past 2 weeks, operating undercover as a custodial employee named Jim." A board member named Mr. Henderson, an older gentleman who looked like he'd seen everything, cleared his throat nervously. "Mr. James, with all due respect, why would you take such an extreme measure?" "Because," I replied, pulling out the small dog-eared notebook from my suit pocket, the same notebook I used to jot down supply lists and corporate crimes. The glossy report SynergyFlow provided looked perfect, but I learned a long time ago that if you want to know the true condition of a ship, you don't talk to the captain, you talk to the crew, and you check the bilge. I opened the notebook and laid it flat on the table, right between Chad and Tiffany. They recoiled as if it were radioactive. My preliminary findings indicate that the valuation of $3 billion is based on fraudulent data, chronic mismanagement, and a corporate culture that actively suppresses truth in favor of narrative, I stated, cutting straight to the point. Chad exploded. He jumped to his feet, knocking his chair back. "This is slander. You have no proof. You're a fired employee trying to extort us." "Sit down, Chad," I commanded, and the authority in my voice was absolute. My security detail shifted subtly outside the door. Chad hesitated, looking wildly around the room. Realizing he had no control whatsoever, he slowly, shakily, sat back down. "Regarding proof," I continued, "I have plenty. And regarding my employment status, I was fired yesterday by Mr. Chad and Ms. Tiffany for submitting a concise anonymous report detailing the ethical violations I observed." I met Tiffany's gaze. "Do you remember what you told me, Tiffany, as I was leaving? You told me to stick to jobs where people appreciate my services, like washing cars. You said you pay people here for innovation, not for snooping." She swallowed hard, unable to speak. "Well," I said, a flicker of cold amusement in my voice, "I decided to upgrade my services. Today, I am here not as a janitor, but as the owner of the capital you so desperately seek. And my first official act is to turn this acquisition closing meeting into a formal internal investigation." I nodded to David. "David, please distribute the report." David's team moved quickly, sliding the stark black and white reports to every board member. The silence returned, thick and heavy, as everyone began scanning the documents. Chad and Tiffany, however, didn't look at the reports. They were focused entirely on me, their faces a mixture of fear and pure, blinding hatred. "Let's start with item 1, I began, my voice clear and measured like a prosecutor addressing a jury. "Data manipulation. SynergyFlow's Q4 projection model, which dictates the 20% growth figure central to our valuation, was artificially inflated. I personally overheard Chad instruct an engineer named Pete to make it 20% and manipulate the data incorrectly to meet the target, ignoring the actual user churn metrics." I looked at Chad. "Chad, do you deny directing an employee to falsify growth projections for an investor report?" Chad opened his mouth, but no sound came out. "Let's move to item 2, wasteful spending and misclassification of assets," I pressed on. "Your balance sheet lists $750,000 worth of proprietary data modeling hardware as active cutting-edge assets. Oh, this hardware is in fact outdated, shrink-wrapped and sitting in the corner of your server room. where I cleaned every Tuesday and Friday night, by the way. You have failed to account for depreciation and uselessness. The board members began whispering amongst themselves, their initial excitement replaced by grim concern. Mr. Henderson looked particularly worried, pulling his reading glasses lower on his nose to scrutinize the line items I had highlighted. Furthermore, I continued, flipping a page in my notebook. I documented excessive, deliberate food waste, specifically the nightly disposal of thousands of dollars of untouched gourmet catering, costing the company an estimated $150,000 annually, all while claiming cash efficiency in your investor deck. Tiffany finally found her nerve, attempting to dismiss the claims. That's operational overhead. Every startup has catering issues. That's not fraud. That is a symptom of arrogance and gross financial negligence, Tiffany, I interrupted sharply. It shows a fundamental disrespect for capital and resources. But if you want to talk about fraud, let's talk about item 3, labor practices and manipulation of retention metrics. I leaned in again, making sure my voice carried maximum impact. SynergyFlow's investor reports boast a 90% employee retention rate for the last fiscal year. However, I overheard Chad and Tiffany discussing their plan to force a highly valued engineer, Mark, to quit by giving him a terrible review and placing him on a performance improvement plan. The explicit purpose was to avoid paying a severance package and to keep the voluntary turnover metric low for the acquisition report. I slammed my hand lightly on the table. The sound echoed in the sudden silence. You are actively destroying the careers of dedicated employees and manipulating HR data simply to save a few $1,000s on severance, all while demanding a $3 billion payout based on fictional growth, I stated, my gaze locking onto both founders. That is not hustle culture, Tiffany. That is malice. The board members were now openly agitated. This wasn't just bad accounting. This was a toxic, ethically bankrupt operation. Chad, realizing his back was against the wall, tried to use the only defense he had left, attacking my credibility. You can't trust anything this man says, Chad yelled, pointing at me. He's a disgruntled cleaner. He was spying on us. He's obsessed. He was fired for cause. I smiled faintly. Yes, I was fired for cause. The cause was reporting the truth. I turned to Brenda, the HR manager who had been standing nervously near the door throughout the meeting. She looked terrified, but I needed her testimony. Brenda, I said gently, please step forward. You were present yesterday when I was terminated. Can you confirm the reason Mr. Chad and Ms. Tiffany gave for my immediate dismissal? Brenda hesitated, looking from the founders to me, clearly petrified of crossing either party. Brenda, this is a formal investigation now, I assured her. I am asking you a direct question regarding labor practices at SynergyFlow. Your honest response is critical. Taking a deep breath, Brenda finally spoke, her voice shaky but audible. Yes, Mr. James. Jim was fired because he wrote an anonymous internal report detailing several ethical concerns, including data manipulation and waste. Mr. Chad said he didn't need a disgruntled custodial worker sowing discord before the acquisition. The confirmation hung in the air. Chad and Tiffany had, in front of witnesses, admitted that they preferred deception over integrity. I thanked Brenda and dismissed her. I looked around the table. The atmosphere had completely shifted from celebration to a wake. My investigation is complete, I announced, rising slowly to my feet. And the conclusion is definitive. I reached into my inner jacket pocket and pulled out a single sheet of paper, a short, formal letter. Chad, Tiffany, members of the SynergyFlow board, I said, holding up the document. When I left your headquarters yesterday, I informed my chief legal counsel to immediately change the objective of this meeting. The $3 billion acquisition is officially cancelled, effective immediately. A shocked murmur swept through the room. Chad looked like he might actually pass out. Tiffany let out a small, panicked cry. Furthermore, I stated, placing the letter on the table, due to the systemic nature of the fraudulent reporting, the deliberate manipulation of employee metrics, and the misclassification of assets, Meridian Capital is not simply walking away. We are formally notifying the SEC, the relevant regulatory bodies, and the State Attorney General's office of these findings. I paused, allowing the full weight of the announcement to crush them. I am also advising the SynergyFlow board right now that my team will be freezing all remaining capital transfers and assets pertaining to the company until a full independent financial audit is completed. This company is not just financially unstable, it is ethically corrosive. I looked directly at Chad and Tiffany, who were now staring blankly, their billion-dollar dream dissolving into criminal investigation right before their eyes. You dismissed me as invisible. You called me a snooper. You assumed that the person cleaning up your mess had no authority, no intelligence, and certainly no voice. I picked up my janitor's notebook. This little notebook contains the truth of SynergyFlow, I said, tapping the cover. It shows that you weren't building a disruptive company. You were building a house of cards designed to defraud investors and abuse your staff. And now, the cleanup crew is here. I turned to the SynergyFlow board members. Gentlemen, I suggest you immediately begin the process of removing Mr. Chad and Ms. Tiffany from all executive positions. You have a massive liability on your hands and the clock is ticking. I didn't wait for a response. I didn't need one. My work here was done. The stage was set for the final brutal dismantling. I gave David a curt nod. Let's go, David. We have a lot of paperwork to file. As I walked out of the conference room, leaving behind the stunned board and the two founders whose faces were contorted in utter, speechless defeat, I heard Chad finally scream, "You can't do this! We fired you! You're just Jim!" I paused at the door, turning back one last time. "No, Chad," I said, my voice quiet now, but cutting through the noise. "You fired James, and James doesn't forget." I walked out, leaving the chaos behind me. The acquisition was dead. The founders were exposed. But the story wasn't quite over. I had cancelled the deal and exposed the rot to the board, but I still needed to ensure that the good employees, like Mark and Pete, were protected, and that Chad and Tiffany faced the full consequences of their actions. The real corporate cleaning was just beginning. I didn't linger. Once the truth was delivered, my job was done. The look on Chad and Tiffany's faces, that raw, immediate understanding that their entire carefully constructed fantasy had just been reduced to dust, was all the satisfaction I needed. As I walked out, David, my chief legal counsel, caught up to me. He was grinning, adrenaline pumping through him. "James, that was theatrical," he said, adjusting his tie. "I've filed the initial regulatory notices. The SEC received the summary of the data manipulation less than 5 minutes after you sat down. The damage control for SynergyFlow is already impossible." "Good," I confirmed, stepping into the waiting armored sedan. "Now, David, I need you to focus on two things. First, make sure that board understands the gravity of the legal exposure. They need to clean house immediately, or they're all going down with the ship. Second, I need to talk to the engineers." "The engineers?" David raised an eyebrow. "Yes, Pete and Mark, the ones whose work they were manipulating or whose jobs they were trying to destroy. Get me their contact information. I'm not going to let Chad and Tiffany's rot ruin genuinely talented people." The next 48 hours were a whirlwind of legal action, media leaks and corporate panic. The story naturally was too juicy to stay quiet for long. A $3 billion acquisition cancelled by the investor who went undercover as a janitor. It sounded like a badly written movie script, but it was real. The news broke first on a niche tech blog, citing unconfirmed reports of massive internal fraud discovered during final due diligence. By the afternoon, the major financial news networks were covering the collapse, showing nervous analysts trying to figure out how Meridian Capital, my group, had been so far ahead of the curve. Meanwhile, inside SynergyFlow, the chaos was absolute. David kept me updated. The board, terrified of personal liability and regulatory fines, acted swiftly. Chad and Tiffany were placed on immediate administrative leave, stripped of all access, and escorted out of the building by a different kind of security detail than mine, the kind that carried boxes of personal belongings. I heard that when they left, the paparazzi were already waiting. Chad, the man who demanded perfection and manufactured growth, had to shield his face with his tailored suit jacket. Tiffany, who worried about the aesthetic of seeing a janitor, was photographed looking utterly disheveled, her carefully crafted image shattered. Their fate, I later learned, was harsh but entirely deserved. The regulatory investigations confirmed every single item in my little notebook. The asset misclassification alone was enough for serious charges. They weren't just incompetent, they were criminally negligent. They lost everything, their company, their reputation, and their freedom to easily operate in the corporate world again. The wealth they had flaunted was gone, devoured by legal fees and penalties. As for the building, the glossy headquarters in Austin, my group, Meridian Capital, quietly bought the outstanding mortgage from the bank. It was a good piece of real estate, and Chad and Tiffany's names were scrubbed from the lease agreements. Poetic justice, really. I finally owned the place I used to mop. But the cleanup of the human collateral was the most important part to me. I personally called Pete. The young engineer Chad had terrified into manipulating data. Pete answered the phone cautiously. Hello? Pete, this is James. James of Meridian Capital. There was a long silence on the line. Mr. James? I don't know what to say. I'm sorry about the projection, sir. I was just following orders. Stop right there, Pete, I cut in gently. You don't need to apologize. Your initial raw data, the one showing the true user churn, was accurate. You were reporting the truth and you were punished for it. That's not your fault, it's the failure of leadership. I told him I knew exactly what Chad had asked him to do. I told him I had heard the entire conversation. Look, the company is going through a massive restructuring, I explained. But the core product you and your team built, that has real value. I'm not going to let it die. I'm starting a new venture capital fund focused on ethical technology development, and I need brilliant, honest engineers. If you're interested, I'd like to offer you a position with a significant raise and the promise that you will only ever report the truth. Pete was speechless. He accepted immediately. Then there was Mark, the engineer they planned to force out to save a severance package. I found him already looking for new work, demoralized and feeling like a failure, just as Chad and Tiffany intended. I called Mark and told him the entire story, starting from the moment I overheard their plan to ruin him. Mark, you weren't a complainer, I told him. You were the only one pointing out the critical customer service backlog. That's not bad morale, that's dedication to the product. We need people like you. Mark also joined my new venture. I didn't just save their jobs, I saved their faith in the corporate world. I made sure they understood that integrity, even when it costs you, eventually pays dividends. A few weeks later, the dust had settled. SynergyFlow was in receivership, and the remaining assets, the genuinely good technology and the honest employees, were being folded into a new, smaller, ethically managed entity. I was back in my main office looking out at the skyline. David walked in, placing a file on my desk. That's the final closure report on SynergyFlow, he said. The board is suing Chad and Tiffany personally. It's ugly, James. Really ugly. I nodded, picking up the file, but I didn't open it. I knew what was inside. Lies, waste, and the cold, hard cost of arrogance. You know, David, I mused, leaning back in my chair. When I started this little experiment, I figured I'd maybe find some padded expense accounts or some minor negligence. Standard startup fluff. You found fraud at the highest level, David corrected me. Yes, and the most shocking part wasn't the $3 billion they tried to steal. It was the sheer contempt they had for the entire operation, for the people, for the truth, for the very capital they needed to survive. I picked up the small dog-eared janitor's notebook from my desk, the one I had used to document everything. It was now sitting next to my multi-million-dollar trading terminal. This notebook, I said, tapping the cover. This is the most valuable piece of due diligence I've ever conducted. It cost me nothing but 2 weeks of my time and a few sore muscles. David chuckled. You should write a book, James. The Billionaire Janitor. Maybe, I said, smiling faintly. But the lesson is simple, David. People think that success is about the pitch, the presentation, the glossy facade. They think the cleaning crew is invisible. I stood up and walked over to the window, looking down at the city lights. The lights of 1,000 companies trying to make it, some honestly, some not. The real truth of a company isn't in the board reports, I concluded. It's in the trash they leave behind, the secrets they shred, and the way they treat the people they think don't matter. If you want to know the integrity of a system, you don't look at the top, you look at the very bottom. I learned that Chad and Tiffany thought they were too important to notice the invisible man with the mop. They thought they were operating on a level where ethics were flexible and people were disposable. They learned the hard way that when you disrespect the cleanup crew, you risk having the entire house of cards swept away. And me? I learned that sometimes the best way to make a $3 billion decision is to spend 2 weeks cleaning toilets. It was the most honest work I'd done in years, and I wouldn't trade that experience for anything. I put the notebook back down, ready to face the next challenge. The world of finance is full of glossy blueprints, but I'll always know where to find the oil pan, and I'll always be ready to pick up the mop again, just in case.